Welcome everybody. So during this discussion, we're going to discuss why we should be doing clinical studies and when in these countries, Taiwan, Korea, and Japan. And also, I hope that we can share with you some of the best practices and some learnings, and talking about some of the business models the various companies have been using. But first of all, I would like the panelists to introduce themselves. Dr. Chang?
Yes, I'm Dr. Christina Chang from Abbott, Taiwan. I have been in the industry for already 5 years, starting from Novartis, AstraZeneca, and then in Abbott. My background, I'm a gastroenterologist. I had practices in Europe, in Spain, specifically in surgery.
Takano-san, I think the audience already knows you, more or less.
Okay. Okay. As I mentioned in my bio, so I joined Homa Yamanouchi in 1986 and still survive in one company. Yamanouchi merged with Fujisawa and became Astellas, but Astellas is real Japanese pharma. So I stay only one pharma more than 25 years. And my major is a pharmacist. And my current responsibility is whole of development activities, especially development strategy and clinical development planning for whole of Asia Pacific, but excluding Japan. So West India until India, South until Australia and New Zealand, and all of East Asian countries and ASEAN countries are my responsibility for all of Astellas project of whole of development stages. Thank you.
Dr. Choi?
Yeah. I'm Sung-Jun Che from Korea. I started a pharma career from Merck and moved to Sanofi Aventis and Wyeth and finally Pfizer, and also I moved to the Korean domestic company called Hano. Currently I'm in charge of all the medical, so I'm working as a chief medical officer as well as the global development in United States. So my training background is cardiology, but currently I'm working more on the biotherapeutics.
Thank you very much. So we have 3 topics to discuss during this panel discussion, and the first topic is basically how we can leverage on established infrastructure available for complex clinical trials in Taiwan, Korea, and Japan. And first of all, I would like Dr. Choi, if you can define for us, what do you consider a complex clinical trial? And then I hope that Takano-san can discuss what are the clinical trial considerations. So, Dr. Choi, can you?
Yes, starting from the Korean experience, when I working in the multinational pharma in Korea, we usually have the multinational clinical trial, including Korea, Japan, and China, and Taiwan. Sometimes it is not easy. You may imagine that medical practice and also some of the clinical environment is somewhat different from each country. So that is the reason why sometimes it is not easy to collaborate as one single protocol. Sometimes it needs some of the deviation from each country. But it is not good for the multinational company to register the product in each country because usually they are according to the global development plan. But sometimes deviation cannot make that happen in each country. So I'm thinking that it is a very complex situation in Asian countries sometimes. But recently the regulatory environment is going better and better. So and also the timeline for the IND and also other supporting management is quite feasible. So currently it is not a big issue except for the China. You may imagine that they need a lot of time for the IND, but usually Korea, Taiwan, and Japan can start together, and then we are waiting for the China joining in the clinical trial. So complex and means really complex, but recently it is getting better.
Thank you. And also, I mean, you mentioned, when we discussed yesterday, you mentioned, what you consider complex clinical trials, where we need like biomarker assessments, where you need like central laboratories to do some additional research and patient selection. And that's when you can really leverage the infrastructure these countries have. And if Takano-san, if you can discuss with the audience what are the clinical trial considerations and when really the infrastructure trumps the cost, because we know that cost is an important factor.
Yes, as everyone recognizes, Japan is the most highest cost country in the world for clinical trials. But still, in Japan, advantage and disadvantage. Highest cost is our disadvantage in Japan. But advantage in Japan we have. Firstly, quality is very high. So US FDA GCP inspection we can see, and PMDA GCP inspection is training for Japanese farmers and farmers in Japan. And speed, enrollment speed is very high in Japan. So quality high, speed high, and cost a little higher, but still competitive. Another reason of Japanese good competitive is marketability. So China will overtake Japan soon and become second biggest pharmaceutical market country, probably very soon. But in Japan, as of now, still we are the second biggest pharmaceutical market country. So complexity of this situation, Japan is still competitive. And so, and one of ICH country, our infrastructure and expertise and experience probably better than other emerging countries. So mixture of these considerations, Japan is still, you need to pick up and you need to start clinical studies in Japan.
Yeah, we have the regulatory requirements in Japan that we have to meet, and in addition, the established infrastructure that we can leverage on. And also, I just read an article recently, not so recently, that Korea has become the third largest clinical trial site, actually, given the infrastructure and the knowledge of the doctors who actually been trained, many of them in the US. So you have the network there, and you have the expertise and a very well established infrastructure. And Dr. Chung, how about Taiwan? Taiwan also has a established infrastructure.
Yes, I think that we are very similar comparing Taiwan and Korea. We have the expertise, the cost is inexpensive. We have very high quality KOLs. For example, many of our KOLs have been chairs or advisors in international studies. For example, specifically the National Taiwan University Hospital that have been conducting many phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 studies. Even this year, just in February, they formed a consortium between Japan and Taiwan to conduct in the future phase 1 studies and to look for biomarkers that will be finding the trend for new project in the future.
Yes, and I think we should also mention the very tight network that exists between or among Japan, Korea, and Taiwan, that really the investigators and the medical community, they really reach out to each other. So I would like to move on to our second topic, which is determining profitable therapeutic areas for the aging population, and what are the selection criteria, and what are the areas of interest. And I would like Dr. Choi to discuss with the audience.
Okay, so actually the aging population is increasing in every country, especially for Asia Pacific, and Japan is the life expectancy is longest in the world, and again in the Korea and China is approaching like that. So actually aging population is very popular in each country, and we are thinking that what kind of disease may be suitable for the clinical trial and also the clinical development. So first, you may know that cancer is most interesting area for the aging population. So especially for the Northeastern Asia, that you know that the gastric cancer and also the hepatocellular carcinoma is a unique cancer for the high prevalence, and also there is an unmet need for the clinical development. So that is the reason why when I work in the multinational company, we run the clinical trial for the gastric cancer or hepatocellular carcinoma together with Japan, China, and Taiwan, because it is fastest patient recruitment, also the various population of the diseases, and also having a good clinical practice and also medical practice in those hospitals based in the Northeastern Asia. So I think it is a very good approach. Also, the cardiovascular and the stroke is also increasing everywhere in Asian regions. So there is a lot of development for the antihypertensive agent and also anti-dyslipidemia agent, and also even in the diabetes, especially for China, there is a lot of diabetes increasing prevalence nearly every year. And for the QL diseases, such as autoimmune disease and the allergic disease, actually life expectancy is prolonging every year. There is a lot of unmet need for the treatment of rheumatoid arthritis and also the bronchial asthma and other diseases such as CNS diseases and such as Alzheimer's diseases. So that is also the common disease area in this region as well as the developed countries. One point I want to highlight is for the vaccines. So actually vaccine is usually for the pediatric population, but recently the herpes simplex virus vaccine and also the adult pneumococcal vaccines, they can prevent the diseases for the cervical cancer and also pneumococcal pneumonia in the region. So I think that it is aging population is very suitable for this kind of actually clinical trial and the development. So that is also for the aging population needs additional highlight for this clinical development.
So in order to do the regional or global clinical study, you need to consider many different factors, and you know you named a couple of diseases, and I'm just wondering among these countries, so is the medical practice, the treatment paradigm is similar? So is it possible to run a study?
Yeah, I think that usually Korea and Taiwan and China, most of the investigators have the postgraduate course in United States or the other developed countries. So they learned a lot from the developed country, and actually the international guideline usually they are following. So it's very same platform for the treatment. For Japan, maybe Japan has another Japanese guideline for the treatment, but usually adopted from most of the clinical data from Western countries. So we think that we can find some of the common denominator for the treatment or the clinical trials for treating diseases. So I think it is not a difficult task for us.
Takano-san, anything to add from the Japan perspective?
Actually, diversification about clinical trials in East Asia. So Dr. Che mentioned disease, this area specific disease, high incidence diseases. But in addition to this, I'd like to mention ICH-E5 accept. Probably we have 3 different points between Japan and Korea, Taiwan, and including China. So 3 points. One is acceptance of ICH-E5. And still, phase 1 to phase 3 is basically needed in Japan. And Japan accepted ICH-E5 concept and bridging strategy. So, very popular development scenario in Japan 5 or 7 years ago was just bridging. So at the same time of conducting global phase 3 trial. So in Japan, we conduct phase 2 dose finding study. And at the same time, so finish global phase 3 and finish global phase 2 study. So we will submit this data to PMDA, and almost the same optimum dose is obtained. So can we skip phase 3 in Japan? So this was our original idea in those days. But in Japan, still phase 1 to 3 was needed. And phase 2 timing in Japan and phase 3 timing in global is the same. So this is the strongest reason to reduce drug lag in Japan. But ICH-E5 is ICH decided concept, so US or EU can adapt bridging strategy. But as of now, US FDA, EMA don't accept, probably they can accept, but any applicant try to submit bridging strategy, phase 1 to 3 in Western regions. But in Japan, only Japan accepted bridging strategy. This is bring us current challenge to need to eliminate drug lag now. And the second point is optimal dose. Korea and Taiwan, usually historical reason, they accepted Western dosage of many products. But in Japan, we needed phase 1 to 3 within Japan from the first. And another historical reason of Japanese MHA lab, they prefer safety to efficacy in the past. But US FDA in the past, efficacy to safety. Recently, unified to the same concept and same strategy. But historically, US dosage, of course, our body weight and our body size is different, but usually US FDA, US EU dosage is higher than Japan. But Taiwan and Korea, from the first, they don't need local clinical data. So many drugs in Korea and Taiwan, dosage is same as Western countries, not Japan. So this is another challenge. The final one is Dr. Chen mentioned, diagnosis or treatment guideline. So in Japan, we established within Japan, but Korea and Taiwan and China also, they have some intend to follow US guideline as it is. So our hair, eye color, and skin and body size is very similar in East Asia. Medical practice same, and culture same. Our food and chopstick, this situation is very similar, but guideline different, dosage different, and approach for diagnosis and treatment is different.
Mm-hmm. Is it something being done to harmonize, or is it possible to harmonize, or
yes,
not?
we need to harmonize.
Mm-hmm. So there is a strong desire to harmonize.
It's still under construction stage. Because we still have so many drugs, different dosage, and different approach to treat.
So even though we have common areas of interest in terms of the diseases for the aging population, it may not be possible just to run one study because of the differences in guidelines and dosages.
Yes, concomitant drug also, standard drug also.
And the
Korea and
standard of
Taiwan,
care, and the
the
standard
drug lab is very seldom. In Japan, so very standard drug is not yet launched in Japan. So we basically cannot set comparator.
Thank you. So going to the third topic, our last topic is basically what are the sustainable business models to remain competitive against emerging markets. And I would like Dr. Chang to share some experience with us. So what is being done at your company? How do you do? What business models are you using?
It depends of the product, it depends of the therapeutic area. For example, one case that happened was, for example, to pull together resources. For example, I had one case is where Japan had developed a protocol, but they didn't have the resources. But in Taiwan, I had the resources. So we pull our strength and weakness together, and then we make the project happen. And then at the final, we get the approval for the product in Asia. That is the one business model. And I think that's what we can look forward for the future is for pan-Asian clinical trial. It can be done between Korea and Taiwan, or even including Japan and China. I think that is possible. We just have to find the similarities and try to harmonize, and based on the similarities, find one single format that can be applicable in the region.
And you also mentioned, because you know the topic is basically how we can remain competitive against emerging markets, and one topic you mentioned when we talked yesterday, that basically your company is looking at local companies who develop a drug in preclinical and phase 1 phase, and then you work with them, you collaborate or you out-license to basically control the cost.
Yes, we were looking a lot about biotech, because first it started with the local leaders in Taiwan, and specifically with our president Ma Ying-jeou. When he got elected, he started to make some very plan for allocated resources in clinical research and for biotech. So this was discussed between the medical association with the regulatory authorities and with the DOH, the Department of Health, and with all the ministers, and then they got a consensus to allocate resources, because I think that the biggest challenge, or one of the major challenge that we have to conduct clinical trial, is to ensure that we have allocated resources to do our clinical trial. And one strategy was to focus on biotech, and the future, the past experience was to target some local companies, or for example academia institution that have very good project and very good ideas in clinical research, and they will develop in phase 1 and phase 2, and then the big companies will target them to take them to phase 3, and then depending on the profile of the drug, they will decide if they want to take that product as a product for the company, just buy it based on very clear agreement. But sometimes there were cases that there were failure. So now the trend is to make co-development, because the risk is lower.
Thank you. So right now, I mean, currently, if I remember correctly, the running clinical trials in Korea, it's still lower than running clinical trials in the US. I think it's, Dr. Choi, you mentioned it's about 70%, but what is your thinking? So how Korea can stay competitive against emerging markets such as, you know, China and India, where the cost is really low?
Yes. Current competitive advantage of the clinical trials in Northeastern Asia are, first one is the quality, and second one is the speed of the patient recruitment. So that is actually the advantage for the compared to China and India, because China and India there is a lot of patients, but actually the approach and accessibility to the hospital that's sometimes very difficult. In Korea, Korea, Taiwan, and Japan, there's a lot of hospitals, is well trained, and actually my training background is cardiologist, and also I've done in the interventional cardiology. So door to needle or door to balloon time is less than 60 minutes because we have very good facilities nationwide in Korea. So again, it's the same in Japan or Taiwan. So actually for the quality conduction of a clinical trial is mandatory recently for the GCP compliance and also having the good documentation for the medical record. I think that it is a single competitive advantage. And the second one is the speed of the patient recruitment. As you imagine that compared to China and India, Japan, Taiwan, Korea is a relatively smaller country for the landscape. So actually, for example, in Korea, Seoul is the third biggest clinical trial participation in the world. That is because there is 5 big hospitals, it's mammoth-sized big hospitals. They are running the clinical trials up to nearly 70% of all Korean clinical trials. So actually, it is very compact, and also the physicians and also the supporting staffs are really well trained, and they have a lot of experience for the conducting clinical trials, especially for the multinational clinical trials. So that is the reason why the patient recruitment is also very high in speed. So also the network. So as Christina mentioned, that there is a good network for the oncology for Japan, Taiwan, China, and with Korea. So recently, the group published the journal paper in the Lancet for the clinical trial of the adjuvant chemotherapy after gastrectomy. It's a classic trial. It took nearly 6 years to complete, but it is a well-developed clinical trial in this region. So that is the reason why the Northeastern Asia is a good place for the clinical development compared to emerging market. Even though emerging market is very big in the business opportunity, but still we have some of the opportunity advantage for conducting clinical trials as well as to maintaining the good quality. And the cost-wise, also in the previous survey in Korea, actually the whole cost compared to US, we are reaching 70 to 80%. So it's rapidly increasing because of the Korean investigators are well respected among multinational CROs and also the multinational companies. Even though the cost is increasing, still the total medical cost is relatively cheaper in Korea and as well as in Taiwan. So I think that it is also another advantage for us. So for the IND timeline, as Takano-san mentioned, that Korea, Taiwan, Japan is very good for the IND approval. So still we have a lot of the opportunity in the development in the clinical trials, especially for the Asian-specific diseases. So there is a reason why I promote Northeastern Asia is good for the clinical development.
So Takano-san, my last question is, what do you see in Japan? Because Japan, running clinical trials in Japan, it's a well-known fact that it's expensive. Do you see this cost rising, or do you see that we can keep the costs as they are? So, any insight?
Reducing. The reason of why Japan is the highest in the world is we need to pay almost the same money to investigator and study nurse, clinical research coordinator in work for SMO. So we need to pay double money to both of them at the same time. But due to strict competition, so number of SMO is reducing. Also, price of SMO is reducing. So we are still highest price country in the world, but total cost is reducing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. So we have 10 minutes left, and I'm just wondering, do we have any questions from the audience, the panel members? Do you want to ask any questions? I hope so. Thank you. We have one.
Hi, this is Vinay Krishna from J&J. This is a question regarding Japan and trials run at very high costs over there. And my question is, what is the cost of the patient at the end of the day? So are you seeing more efforts being done in back-end clinical functions to take it offshore, like you've already seen the US and in Europe, etc., coming to India and China, etc. Then
I missed.
So the question was whether you will see something similar in Japan, that trials will be done outside of Japan.
For
Not
our
just
companies-
trials,
companies-
but also, the supporting back-end functions of the trials, because a lot of that's not the direct cost to investigators and enrollment in these countries, but a hell of a lot of back-end biometrics work, pharmacovigilance, etc. Do you see it more moving out of Japan into, say, mainland China or other places?
Okay, bigger size or middle size of globally, but bigger size in Japan. So, including Astellas. In our company's case, so we conducted so many clinical studies within Japan. So we have many staff in development division in Japan. So we have, as for Astellas, more than around 200 CRAs inside, and data manager and biostatistician and medical writer also. So our responsibility sharing in-source or outsource in Japan is very similar to US and EU. But China, Korea, Taiwan is different. So most of development activity, including monitoring, is outsourced, is occupied. Outsourcing to CROs is our majority of solution.
But not in Japan.
Not Japan is different. So
Japan
we
is
have
different.
many staff.
Yes, because traditionally you are a Japanese company, so you have many
Yes,
staff.
and still more than half is domestic studies.
And
So I am from GSK, working on the clinical development of the cancer immunotherapeutics in the Asia Pacific. In some cancer types like non-small cell lung cancer, gastric, and the liver cancer. So one challenge I noticed in the designing and conducting the clinical study is, as you said, there is a difference, in the standard of treatment among the countries in the region. For example, like gastric cancer, Japan, they use their own treatment, the regimen. Again, Korea, China, they have their own treatment regimen. So I think one of the reasons would be there's no single, the guideline across the region because of, I think it is because of there's no well-established scientific organization across the region. For example, in US, ESCO, they have in Europe like EORTC, but I think in our region, this kind of scientific organization is still developing, discussing on the guideline, etc., etc. So I'm wondering if we means our sponsor, our industry, should encourage, or support academic society to have this kind of like well-established single scientific organization in the region. So I wanted to get your opinion on this point.
Yeah, very good question. And recently there is a movement to go for the single treatment guideline among different countries. So in the academia, there are a lot of the meetings every year between China, Korea, and Japan. And as I mentioned, the classic trial, when we developed the trial at the time, the surgery technique is very important at the time. So all the important investigators gather together and have the workshop, how to have the operation, so how to dissect the lymph node and what level of the lymph node should be dissected. So, and they reached a good agreement and then go for the clinical trial up to 6 years. So I think that your comment is really valuable. So actually the academia is currently working hard for the collaborating and also reaching agreement for the single treatment guideline. But sometimes it is not easy in the because of the scientific reason, also some of the political reasons. So reimbursement system is totally different, and also some of the characteristics of the disease is usually similar, but some population, some ethnic sensitivity is present in the special type of cancers. So I think that their movement is going on, and probably we can reach the conclusion very soon. But still we need some improvement for the developing single treatment guideline among different countries.
I can share a practice that we have in our company. By the way, in February we get together. We call it adverse board in the country, either in East Asia or in North Asia, and then with the principal KOL of the medical association, and then they will discuss the possibility to get to have a guideline. And it's not easy, as you said, but it's possible. For example, at the final of our discussion, we have a very well-planned strategy that will take around 2 to 3 years, but it will happen. So my comment is that it is not easy, but not impossible.